The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of Elite Precision Shooting Club as Rachel Morrison approached the imposing glass entrance. She'd driven 2 hours from her small apartment in Riverside, drawn by their advertisement for Veterans Appreciation Day, half-price range time and complimentary instruction. After 3 years of civilian life as a bookkeeper, she thought it might be nice to touch base with her old skills. Rachel paused at her reflection in the glass doors. Her crisp army dress uniform still fit perfectly, the sergeant stripes gleaming under the morning light. She'd chosen to wear it today out of respect for the occasion, though something in her gut whispered warnings she couldn't quite place. The moment she stepped through those doors, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Ma'am?" A voice boomed across the marble lobby, dripping with condescension. "We're going to need you to remove that costume immediately." Rachel turned to face Marcus Blackwood, the club's owner. At 52, the former Marine colonel commanded the room with his imposing 6'4" frame and salt and pepper hair, maintained in a perfect military cut. His eyes swept over her petite 5'4" frame with obvious contempt. "This is a respectable establishment," Blackwood continued, his voice rising to ensure everyone in the lobby could hear. "Not some stolen valor fantasy camp for wannabe weekend warriors." The words hit Rachel like physical blows. Around her, the wealthy club members, retired officers, defense contractors, and politicians in expensive shooting jackets began to form a semicircle. Their faces showed the kind of cruel anticipation usually reserved for public executions. Dr. Richard Peterson, a defense contractor whose gold-rimmed glasses caught the chandelier light, adjusted his tie with a cold smile. "Marcus, surely you're not going to let this little charade continue?" His wife Patricia whispered loudly to her friend about the pathetic lengths some people go to for attention. The couple had paid more for their matching custom holsters than Rachel made in 2 months. Rachel felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in, the same feeling she'd experienced during enemy ambushes overseas. But this was different. These weren't enemy combatants trying to kill her. These were supposed to be fellow Americans questioning her very identity. "Sir," Rachel replied calmly, reaching for her military ID, "my credentials are legitimate. I served 3 tours overseas with the 75th Ranger Regiment." Blackwood's laugh was harsh and theatrical. "The Rangers? Now I know you're lying." "Rangers don't come in your size, sweetheart. They're elite soldiers, not desk jockeys playing pretend." He snatched the ID from her hand, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. "Fake IDs are easier to get than authentic military gear these days. I've seen better forgeries at college frat parties." The crowd's murmurs grew louder and more vicious. Someone shouted about stolen valor, while another suggested calling the military police. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she looked around the room at faces filled with anticipation for her humiliation. What none of them knew was that Rachel Morrison had been keeping a secret for 3 years. After leaving the army, she had deliberately chosen anonymity, working as a bookkeeper, living modestly, avoiding anything that might connect her to her military past. The nightmares had finally stopped. The hypervigilance had dulled to manageable levels. But standing in that opulent lobby, something awakened in her chest. It wasn't anger. Anger was hot and uncontrolled. This was something colder, more calculated, the same feeling she'd experienced in the mountains of Afghanistan when impossible shots had saved her squad's lives. "You want me to prove I'm a real soldier?" Rachel asked, her voice carrying a new edge that made several people shift uncomfortably. "Then let's do this properly." The challenge hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Blackwood's face flushed red with excitement and anger. He had been hoping for a quick humiliation, but this was even better, a chance to destroy this pretender's credibility in front of witnesses while demonstrating his own superiority.
"You're on," he growled. "But when you lose, you'll never show your face in my club again, and I'll make sure everyone in this city knows you're a fraud." The crowd erupted in excited chatter as they moved toward the shooting range. Cell phones appeared,
ready to record what they assumed would be a one-sided massacre. Rachel followed silently, her mind already calculating distances, wind patterns, and the dozen other variables that separated amateur shooters from professional killers. The shooting range at Elite Precision was a monument to excess, featuring computerized target systems, climate-controlled airflow, and sound dampening that cost more than most people's homes. Blackwood gestured grandly at the facility like a gladiator owner showing off his arena. "This is where legends are made and pretenders are exposed," he announced to the growing crowd of spectators. Among the gathering audience was Victoria Blackwood, Marcus's wife, a woman whose idea of service was chairing charity galas while her husband collected government contracts. She looked at Rachel with the kind of disdain usually reserved for insects. "Marcus, don't draw this out too long," she called.
"Out."
"We have the congressman's reception at 6, and I don't want to be late because of this situation." Dr. Peterson positioned himself near the control panel, appointing himself as unofficial referee. "Gentleman and lady," he added with a smirk. "Directed at Rachel, I propose we make this interesting. Standard military qualification course, 50 rounds, iron sights only. Blackwood gets his custom rifle, and our guest can use one of the club's basic models." The suggestion drew nods of approval from the crowd, who clearly believed they were stacking the deck in their champion's favor. Rachel accepted the terms without complaint, though internally she was calculating the advantages this actually gave
her. As the club's armourer brought out a standard AR-15, Rachel ran her hands over the weapon with practiced efficiency. The weight was familiar, the balance acceptable, and the trigger pull clean.
She had used thousands of similar weapons during her military service. What the crowd didn't realize was that a master marksman could make any weapon perform beyond its apparent limitations. Blackwood held court with his custom rifle, a piece of art that cost more than most people's cars. The stock was hand-carved walnut, the barrel was match-grade steel, and every component had been precisely machined to microscopic tolerances. "This rifle has never let me down," he boasted to the crowd. "It's an extension of my will, crafted by masters." But as Rachel stepped up to the firing line and began her routine, a series of practiced movements drilled into her muscle memory. Through thousands of hours of training, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. Her breathing settled into the rhythm that had carried her through countless engagements. The first shot surprised even Rachel with its precision. The bullet struck the target's center ring with such accuracy that the electronic scoring system took a moment to register the hit. The crowd, which had been chattering excitedly, fell completely silent. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity as the electronic scoreboard displayed Rachel's perfect shot. Blackwood fired his series with confident efficiency, each one landing within the target's inner rings, but without the surgical precision that Rachel had demonstrated. "Lucky shot," someone in the crowd whispered, but their voice lacked conviction. As the distance increased to 100 yards, then 200, then 300, the gap in performance became increasingly obvious. Rachel's shots maintained their tight groupings, creating almost perfect patterns that defied the limitations of the basic rifle she was using. Blackwood's accuracy, while still impressive, began to show the effects of increased distance and mounting pressure. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the climate-controlled environment. "This is impossible," he muttered between shots, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "No one shoots like that without performance-enhancing drugs or illegal modifications to the weapon." Dr. Peterson, who had been quietly making phone calls during the demonstration, approached with his smartphone in hand. His face had gone pale. "I just spoke with a friend at the Pentagon," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Her service record is classified at levels I didn't know existed. He couldn't tell me details, but he said her unit designation alone is enough to make general officers stand at attention." The crowd began to murmur among themselves, processing the implications of what they were learning. This wasn't just a female veteran who could shoot well. This was potentially one of the most elite soldiers in American military history. Victoria Blackwood looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. Her earlier contempt had been replaced by the kind of embarrassment that comes from being publicly exposed as a fool. But Marcus Blackwood wasn't ready to concede defeat. His carefully constructed image was crumbling before his eyes, and desperation was making him reckless. "I want that rifle inspected immediately," he snarled, "and I want her tested for performance-enhancing substances. This level of accuracy isn't natural." Rachel set down the rifle and turned to face the crowd. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried a hardness that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Blackwood," she said quietly, "you can inspect the rifle all you want. You can test me for drugs. You can question my credentials until you're satisfied. But at the end of the day, you'll still be the man who forced a decorated veteran to prove her service because you couldn't accept that she might be better than you." The transformation in the room's atmosphere was palpable. The same people who had been howling for her humiliation 30 minutes earlier were now staring at her with a mixture of awe and shame. Something was building in the air, a sense that this moment was bigger than just a shooting competition. Word was already spreading beyond the walls of the club, carried by whispered phone calls and hastily sent text messages. By the time they reached the final phase, shots at 400 yards that would challenge even experienced marksmen, the crowd had grown to include staff members and guests from other parts of the club. Someone had posted a live video to social media, and the viewer count was climbing rapidly. Rachel's final shot landed so precisely in the target center that the electronic scoring system registered it as a perfect score, something that hadn't been achieved at this facility in over 5 years. The scoreboard told the complete story. Rachel Morrison had achieved a perfect score using basic equipment, while Marcus Blackwood had posted a respectable but clearly inferior performance with his custom rifle. The silence in the range was deafening. "I've never seen shooting like that outside of special operations demonstrations," Dr. Peterson said, his voice filled with something like reverence. "That level of accuracy, it's not human." Rachel reached into her pocket and pulled out a small leather folder worn from years of handling. Inside were documents that most of the people in that room would never see: special operations orders, commendations for valor, and a Silver Star citation that described actions so classified that most details had been redacted. "My name is Rachel Morrison," she said, her voice carrying quiet authority that made even powerful men pay attention. "I spent 8 years in the United States Army, attached to special operations units that don't officially exist, conducting missions in places you'll never read about in newspapers." She paused, letting that information sink in before continuing. "The scars you wanted to see are on my back, from shrapnel that nearly killed me while I was providing overwatch for a medical evacuation in Kandahar. The training you questioned began when I was 12 years old and continued through 3 combat deployments where every shot I took meant the difference between my brothers and sisters coming home alive or in body bags." The crowd was transfixed. This wasn't just superior marksmanship. It was a masterful demonstration of skills that couldn't be faked, bought, or pretended. Blackwood's face had turned an alarming shade of red. His hands were clenched into fists, and for a moment Rachel wondered if he might actually become violent. "This changes nothing," he said, though his voice cracked slightly. "You could have shown your credentials from the beginning. You could have avoided all this." Rachel looked at him with something approaching pity. "And give you the chance to verify my identity before humiliating me," she replied. "The fact that you demanded I strip off my uniform before proving my worth tells me everything I need to know about your character. A real leader, a true warrior, would have treated me with basic human dignity regardless of what uniform I wore." The words hit their mark. Blackwood staggered slightly as if he'd been physically struck. Around him, his supporters were already beginning to distance themselves, their expressions shifting from anticipation to embarrassment to something approaching horror as they realized what they had been part of. But Rachel wasn't finished. The warrior inside her, dormant for 3 years, was fully awake now. The aftermath of the shooting demonstration was swift and brutal for Marcus Blackwood's reputation. Within hours, word had spread through the city's elite circles, carried by the same people who had been present to witness his humiliation. Social media exploded with cell phone videos of the shooting competition and speculation about the mysterious female veteran who had appeared from nowhere to demonstrate impossible marksmanship skills. The hashtag #RealWarrior began trending locally, with veterans across the country sharing their own stories of discrimination and disrespect. Dr. Peterson, whose defense contracts depended on maintaining relationships with the military establishment, was among the first to distance himself from Blackwood's behavior publicly. "I want to apologize to Sergeant Morrison," he announced at the congressman's reception that evening. "What happened today was unconscionable and does not represent the values that our military community stands for. But the real damage to Blackwood was just beginning." Rachel had spent 3 years building a quiet life, but she hadn't forgotten how to conduct reconnaissance or gather intelligence. That evening, she began making phone calls to old contacts, people she'd served with who now worked in veterans advocacy organizations, military justice, and congressional offices. What she discovered was that Elite Precision Shooting Club had a pattern of behavior that went far beyond what had happened to her. Master Sergeant Julia Rodriguez, who had lost her leg to an IED in Syria, had been refused membership despite her exemplary service record. The club had cited insurance concerns about disabled veterans using their facilities. Staff Sergeant Michael Davis, a Purple Heart recipient struggling with PTSD, had been publicly humiliated when he'd suffered a panic attack during a club event. Blackwood had accused him of being unstable and suggested he seek professional help before trying to play.
Soldier again.
The list went on. Female veterans, minority veterans, veterans with visible and invisible wounds, all had been systematically excluded, humiliated, or driven away from a club that claimed to honor military service. Rachel compiled everything into a detailed report, complete with witness statements and documentation. But she didn't stop there. She reached out to investigative journalists who specialized in veterans issues, providing them with background information and connecting them with other victims. The first major story broke 3 days after the shooting demonstration. Elite Club's not-so-elite treatment of real veterans ran on the front page of the city's largest newspaper, complete with testimonials from multiple veterans who had been mistreated by Blackwood and his staff. Local television stations picked up the story, interviewing veterans who described a pattern of discrimination that went back years. The narrative was devastating, a fake warrior running a club for wealthy pretenders while systematically excluding and humiliating real veterans. Blackwood tried to control the damage through his usual channels, calling in favors from politicians and business associates. But the story had taken on a life of its own. Veterans organizations issued statements condemning the club's practices. Corporate sponsors began withdrawing their support. The breaking point came when the State Attorney General's office announced they were launching an investigation into potential civil rights violations at Elite Precision Shooting Club. Marcus Blackwood's world began to collapse with stunning speed. The investigation revealed financial irregularities that went far beyond discrimination. Elite Precision had been billing itself as a non-profit veterans organization while operating as an exclusive club for wealthy civilians. Thousands of dollars in donations meant for veteran programs had been diverted to facility upgrades and personal expenses. Federal investigators from the IRS and FBI joined the state inquiry, treating the club as a potential fraud operation. Bank records were subpoenaed, employees were interviewed. The carefully constructed facade of respectability began to crumble under official scrutiny. Rachel found herself at the center of a media storm she hadn't anticipated. Interview requests poured in from national news outlets, military publications, and documentary filmmakers. She accepted only a few, always steering the conversation away from her classified past and toward the veterans who had been harmed by systematic discrimination. One interview stood out. Rebecca Martinez, a journalist who had served 2 tours in Iraq before becoming a reporter, asked questions that came from understanding rather than curiosity. "What do you say to people who think your story is too good to be true?" she asked during their conversation at a local diner. Rachel paused, considering her words carefully. "I tell them that every veteran has a story like mine, just maybe not as dramatic. We've all been underestimated, dismissed, or told we don't belong somewhere. The difference is that most of those moments don't get captured on video and shared across the internet." She looked out the window at the modest neighborhood around them. "The real story isn't about my shooting skills. It's about the veterans who didn't have cameras rolling when they were humiliated. It's about the barriers we face when trying to access services we've earned. It's about the assumption that we have to prove our worth over and over again." Meanwhile, Blackwood's attempts to salvage his reputation were becoming increasingly desperate. He hired a crisis management firm and attempted to characterize the investigation as a witch hunt motivated by political correctness and reverse discrimination. But his former supporters were abandoning him rapidly. Corporate sponsors cancelled contracts. Political allies distanced themselves. Even his own club members began resigning in droves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. The final blow came when the Pentagon announced they were reviewing all contracts and relationships with organizations connected to Elite Precision. For a business that had built its reputation on military connections, this was effectively a death sentence. Dr. Peterson, facing his own scrutiny due to his association with the club, made a public statement that inadvertently revealed more than he intended. "I deeply regret my role in what happened to Sergeant Morrison," he said at a hastily called press conference. "I should have recognized immediately that someone with her bearing and precision could only have achieved those skills through the highest levels of military training. My failure to see past my own prejudices allowed a genuine American hero to be subjected to unconscionable treatment." The statement, intended to rehabilitate Peterson's own reputation, only served to highlight the extent of the discrimination Rachel had faced and the extraordinary nature of her military service. The confrontation Rachel had been anticipating came 3 weeks after the shooting demonstration. Blackwood appeared at her modest apartment building, looking like a man who
hadn't slept in days. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like desperation.
"Sergeant Morrison," he began when she answered the door. "I need to speak with you, please." Rachel considered closing the door in his face, but something in his expression made her pause. "You have 5 minutes," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. Her apartment was spartanly furnished with only a few photographs and military decorations displayed on one wall. Blackwood's eyes were drawn immediately to a framed photograph of Rachel in combat gear, standing with her rifle in some unnamed desert location. "I've been doing research," Blackwood said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know who you are now. Operation Midnight Thunder, the ghost of Helmand Province. The sniper who saved 300 coalition troops with impossible shots." He paused, swallowing hard. "Jesus Christ, you're her. You're the legend." Rachel remained silent, neither confirming nor denying his statements. "Some secrets were meant to stay buried." "I didn't come here to grovel," Blackwood continued, though his posture suggested otherwise. "I came to offer you something. My club, my connections, my resources. I was wrong about you, catastrophically wrong. And I want to make it right." He pulled out a thick envelope and set it on her coffee table. "That's a check for $100,000, made out to the Wounded Warrior Project like you demanded, but I'm hoping you'll consider something else." The proposition that followed was one Rachel hadn't expected. Blackwood wanted to transform his elite shooting club into a training facility for veterans, using her expertise to develop programs that would help other service members transition back to civilian life. He was offering her complete control over the operation, unlimited resources, and the chance to help other veterans who might be struggling with the same issues she had faced. "Why would you trust me with something like that?" Rachel asked, genuinely curious about his motivation. "3 weeks ago, you were convinced I was a fraud." Blackwood's laugh was bitter and self-deprecating, "because I've spent my entire adult life pretending to be something I'm not. I was never special forces, never saw combat, never did anything more dangerous than training exercises in Georgia. I built my reputation on the service of better men and women." He met her eyes directly. "And when a real warrior walked into my club, I was so threatened that I tried to destroy her. You could have humiliated me further, could have exposed me as a fraud myself. Instead, you showed mercy. That's not something I would have done in your position." Rachel studied the broken man before her. The offer was tempting in ways she hadn't expected. For 3 years, she had been trying to find purpose in civilian life, to discover what came after the adrenaline and intensity of special operations. But there was something else driving her decision. The memory of all the veterans who had been turned away, humiliated, or excluded. The opportunity to create something that would serve them rather than the wealthy pretenders who had populated Blackwood's club appealed to everything she believed in. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "But if I do this, it's done my way. No interference, no oversight, no attempts to control the narrative. This becomes a place where real veterans can find real help." Blackwood nodded eagerly. "Whatever you want, whatever you need." Rachel looked at the check on her coffee table, then at the man who had tried to humiliate her and had instead launched her into something far more meaningful than either of them could have imagined. "Then we have a deal." 6 months later, Elite Precision Shooting Club had been transformed into the Morrison Veterans Training Center, a facility that combined world-class marksmanship instruction with counseling services, job placement assistance, and community building programs. Rachel had recruited a staff of veteran instructors and counselors, creating an environment where service members could find the support they needed to thrive in civilian life. The center's reputation spread quickly through military communities, and soon veterans were traveling from across the country to participate in Rachel's programs. The transformation was remarkable. Men and women who arrived broken and directionless left with renewed purpose and confidence. The marksmanship training was just the beginning. What Rachel had created was a place where warriors could remember their worth and find new ways to serve. Master Sergeant Julia Rodriguez, who had been refused membership at the original club, became one of the center's most successful graduates. After 3 months of training and support, she had started her own consulting firm specializing in emergency logistics. Her prosthetic leg, once seen as a liability, became a symbol of her resilience and adaptability. Staff Sergeant Michael Davis, the PTSD sufferer who had been publicly humiliated, found healing through the combination of structured training and peer support. He was now one of Rachel's most trusted instructors, specializing in working with veterans who had similar struggles. Marcus Blackwood had kept his word, providing unlimited financial support while staying completely out of operational details. The federal investigation had cost him his fortune and his reputation, but he had found a different kind of purpose in supporting the center's mission. He never claimed credit for the transformation of his former facility, understanding that his role was to provide resources and then step aside. Dr. Peterson became one of the center's most generous donors, using his defense industry connections to provide equipment and funding. His wife Patricia had quietly resigned from several social organizations, too embarrassed by her behavior to continue in polite society. Victoria Blackwood had surprised everyone by becoming one of the center's most effective fundraisers, using her society connections to bring in support from sources that would never have considered helping a veteran organization otherwise. She proved that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the hard work of changing. The video of Rachel's shooting demonstration continued to circulate on social media, becoming required viewing in military leadership courses and veteran advocacy programs. It was used as an example of unconscious bias, the importance of treating all veterans with respect, and the extraordinary capabilities that might be hidden behind ordinary appearances. For Rachel herself, the transformation had been deeply personal. She had discovered that the warrior inside her didn't have to be buried or forgotten. It could be channeled into something constructive, something that helped others rather than destroyed them. Standing on the range at her training center, one sunny afternoon, watching a group of female veterans work through their shooting drills, Rachel reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. The humiliation at Elite Precision had been one of the worst experiences of her civilian life, but it had also been the catalyst for something far better. Sometimes, she realized, the worst moments in life were actually doorways to the best ones. The woman who had been forced to prove her worth had found a way to help others discover their own. The uniform might be different now. She wore civilian clothes most days, but the mission remained the same, protecting and serving those who needed it most. A young veteran approached her hesitantly, wearing fatigues that reminded Rachel of her own early days in service. "Ma'am," the soldier said quietly, "I just wanted to thank you. I saw the video of what happened here. My unit deployed last month, and when people questioned whether I belonged in infantry, I remembered your story. It gave me courage to prove myself the right way." Rachel smiled, feeling the familiar warmth that came from knowing her service still mattered, still made a difference in ways she was only beginning to understand. "That's what we're here for," she replied. "To remind each other that we don't have to prove our worth to anyone. We just have to remember it ourselves." As the afternoon sun streamed through the range's windows, casting long shadows across the shooting lanes, Rachel Morrison knew she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The simple woman who had been humiliated and forced to defend her service had transformed that cruelty into something beautiful, their discrimination into an opportunity to serve others. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.